Greetings, welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. On this episode, we're going to dive into a very important, yes, often conflated, misunderstood, I would argue, but definitely overused and little understood concept called spirit. Yes, spirit is in ghosts, spirit is in apparition, spirit is in entity, spirit as in spiritual being or force or figure. Spirit is in liquor, spirit is in how you feel, and so on and so forth. So spirit is an overly used and I would argue overly abused term that doesn't give us the kind of anchor, the kind of grounding that allow us to appreciate what it is and what it isn't in relation to spirituality, right? Or what I prefer to call spiritual culture. So let's get right into it. Now, there are different points of view, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with these points of view, whether you have debated, discussed, read, or digested this concept of spirit over the years that you've been in existence and you've been able to read and write and so forth. So I won't get into the weeds of it, but I will begin with this. You see, spirit, as it relates to a immaterial, that is a non-physical, non-material force or energy or entity that exists, needs to be qualified. And first start that qualification with you, the human being. And so we human beings, you see, the spirit is in fact our shadow. And that shadow is casted wherever we are, whether we're in light or in dark. Obviously, if it's depending on the pitch of the darkness, you may not be able to see the shadow as clearly in terms of the contrast needed to see the shadow, but the shadow is there because that shadow is your spirit. Now, that may lead you to believe or think or assume that the spirit is outside of you. In fact, the spirit is more so the sort of force field that essentially envelops you, right? So think of it like a bodysuit of sorts, right? That has a reflection that essentially is your shadow. And this particular force field, let's test it out and see if my thinking makes sense to you. And so have you ever been in a situation where you will have a person or persons that either you come close to or they come close to you, and you feel their vibe or energy isn't right? And so either you want to move away or you want to tell the person for them to move away, right? That is a function of your spirit / shadow. That is, once that person enters the orbit, enters the sphere of your spirit, of your particular bodysuit and armor and force, then you begin to what? Your spirit, right, begins to essentially give you the same sensations that your brain does in terms of a feeling, right, through your nervous system that allows your bodily parts, including your eyes, your mouth to speak and your eyes to see, allows your bodily parts to respond or react. And so this body suit and armor or shadow, right, is your spirit. But I want to go further. You see, the spirit therefore lives outside the body, but it is tethered or connected to something inside the body, right? And that is your soul. Now, I like you to think of the soul as this. The soul is the energy source. It's the nuclear center or nuclear reactor that powers the being, that is the power of the being. So it's two. I want to repeat it to make sure you follow me. It is the nuclear reactor that powers the being, but it is also the power of the being itself. You remove or essentially take out that reactor, then the body is simply just a corpse, a cadaver, a dead thing, right? And so that nuclear reactor, that power center is your soul. And that soul, though distinct from, is connected to the clothing, the armor, the shadow, the spirit. How so, you may ask? I'll explain. And so think of the soul as a skeleton, that is the infrastructure, that is the power base, and think of the spirit as your skin. That is the skin, the largest organ, that is a part of the human body, the human anatomy. It is the spirit that clothes, that essentially houses, that protect, is the first line of defense. That's why we tend to what? Feel certain people, feel certain things that are seen and sometimes unseen, and feel certain ways as we go through life, as we go through our mundane day to day, as we go through some of the exceptional experiences. Usually you'll feel it through your spirit first, because it is that what? That first line of defense, right? You know when somebody isn't right, or you feel that sensation that this person isn't right, or something about them isn't right, and you want to what? Exit. You want to what? Head somewhere else. That is your spirit as your first line of defense and first line of what? Detection. That is the coating. That is the skin, the skeleton. Now remember, the skin is tethered to, is connected to the skeleton form, right? Through layers, of course, tissue, skin tissue, and other kinds of matter. But the point is that the two are connected, right? The two are connected, but they're distinct, right? In other words, you can peel a piece of your skin and the skeleton will remain intact, right? It will not be harmed. Eventually, there may be some intrusion that may enter, whether it's bacteria, germ, or a virus. But the point is that it's going to take some time to get to the skeletal structure, and even further, in terms of my analogy, get into what the sort of cellular level of your existence, which is the soul, right? And so, if you follow my analogy, using human body as my metaphor, this coating in skin, the shadow that's casted by that coating in skin is your spirit, right? First line of defense, shield, armor, etc. The soul is your existence at the cellular level, right? Because that same skin is made of what? Cells, right? In fact, we lose, or better yet, we earn about 500 million cells, skin cells particularly, every day, right? That is, we replace and they're regenerated every day within a 24-hour clock cycle. And so that regeneration is powered by what? That nucleus center, that soul. Now, given the distinction between spirit and soul as the way I'm describing it, right? Therefore, your spirit as a first line of defense can be affected and can go either way every moment of your existence, right? And so the mind, your mind, right? Not the brain, not the physical organ, but the mind, right? Is a spirit, right? Another part of your being. And that mind, just like the outer coating, that the layer, that spirit, that shadow that's casted, right? The mind is a part of it. And so the mind itself, notice that you can have what? Thoughts in your mind that essentially moves you left or right. Should I go? Should I stay? Right? Should I leave? Should I do this? Should I do this first? Should I do that first? Right? The mind is what? It's unstable. It's back and forth, because remember, the mind is not a creator of content. It's a receiver of content. The mind is like a big antenna, right? Or a satellite dish you may see on top of certain people's roofs or homes. And that dish will essentially what? Pick up whatever is out there. That's why the mind is not a creator. It's simply a receiver. And that's why the mind will pick up, the spirit will pick up other things, because the spirit is not alone, the spirit of your mind, that is. It will pick up on other kinds of what? Other kinds of energy of that kind that will what? Enter through, right, your nervous system, your central processing unit, that is your cognitive structure, right? Your thinking capacity, right? And then this is what you use to make decisions. And oftentimes we make poor, inconsistent, but often pattern decisions because of what? The spirit of the mind, again, doesn't essentially, it's not the soul, it's not stable as a soul, right? It doesn't come and go, it doesn't essentially, ebb and flow. It doesn't fluctuate, much like the stock market, right? It's much more stable. It's like the value of gold over the millennium, right? The value of gold has kept sort of pace and even eclipsed its average, right? And so it is stable like that, whereas the spirit, it's up and down, right? Either I feel like this or I don't feel like this. Either I think this or I don't think that, right? And so because the spirit is indeterminate in terms of its consistency, in terms of its stability, it's more likely to be what? Wounded and damaged. And so when we get hurt, when we get harmed, when we feel sickness, when we feel disease, it's because whatever microorganism, i.e. things that we can't see, that affects us, right, bodily affects us, is through the spirit first. It's through that first line of defense that is weakened. And so there definitely are rituals to strengthen your spirit. We'll come back to that in another video. But for now, I want to stay with the conceptual discussion that we're having about spirit and soul and shadow and the like. In fact, For your reference, in ancient Kemet or Egypt, there are concepts about the shadow and the spirit and the soul, right? The Ka, the Ba, and the Saku. And so these concepts have been around for a long time and well known among the ancient world, right? Ancient Egypt being a very ancient Kemet, being a very important starting point in that discussion. So you can go back and check the literature and you'll find that these concepts have been around for a while. But what has not been, I think made clear is the distinctions that I'm making and the relationship, right? So at once I'm making a distinction, but I'm also making the connection between these parts of our being and how one or the other can be susceptible compared to the other. And so the soul is harder to, in fact, affect. And so, for example, we can have spiritual entities that we may call negative spirits, negative forces, or demons or demonic forces, whatever adjectives you want to use. They're basically the same type that we're referring to. Now, see, these demonic forces, they don't have a soul, right? They don't have a soul, right? And so these soulless beings, they live amongst us, of course, obviously in human form, because what is a human being but a vehicle? Which goes to say that our spirit can be invaded. Our spirit can essentially be replaced, whereby other spiritual entities or forces can enter through the body. And I'll give you a crude example. The same way that a carjacker may jack your car, hopefully this never happens to you, right? May jack your car, take your car, drive it around, and park it somewhere or dispose of it or chop it up and resell the parts, whatever they do with it, right? In the end, the car has no memory of what happened during, right, and after the jacking. And so you, as a human being, as a physical body holder, can have your car, that is your physical body, jacked, right? And you can have no memory about it. Ever wonder why certain people will plead their innocence saying that, I didn't do it, I don't remember what happened, right? And they weren't drunk or on drugs or the like. These can be some most sober people in the world. And they'll say, and they're adamant about their innocence. And guess what? They're probably right? Because in the moment of that so-called insanity, they were not in control of the vehicle, right? And they have no memory of what happened during the use of this vehicle, that is the human body, right? Because there are other forces and figures, right, of the spiritual nature that can take a hold of it, right? And oftentimes these forces can also pull your spirit away and take it somewhere, right? And that's what happens. Of course, they jump in, they seize, just like a carjacking. They may pull out and toss out. Sometimes they may even kill, which is possible, by the way. They may even kill the spirit of that person and assume that body, just like a carjacker may assume ownership of that vehicle that they jacked. And so the soul is more difficult, right? Depending upon the health of your being. And I say that with a caveat, depending on the health of your being. And so while your soul can be pulled out, your spirit can be pulled out and, of course, replaced either temporarily or for the long haul, because usually you have a time period. I think in human terms, about a day, 24 hours, I think is the longest, whereas your spirit can actually live outside of your body and doesn't come back in. If it doesn't go back, then you're physically, humanly dead, right? And so there's a limit to how long that spirit can be essentially extracted, right? But at that point, it's not just your spirit, right? It's spirit tethered to your soul. Now, that depends on the health of your being. Just like your bodily health. If your immune system is strong and effective, it will fight off what? Diseases by creating either antibodies or T cells rushing to that point of invasion or attack. So whether it's a bacteria, a germ, or a virus, right, it will go rushing to, and of course, begin to attack the intruder or the invading force. And in doing so, it protects the body. But that depends how healthy you are. And so people who tend to have chronic diseases or conditions, they tend to have a weaker and compromised immune system. The same is true for our spiritual health. If we have a compromised being, that means that our soul can be also pulled, right? Those who have stronger immune systems, spiritual immune systems, it means it's harder for their soul to be pulled, right? Yes, spirits can jump in, but again, that's through the first line of defense of your spirit, but their soul can't be pulled, right? It's harder to do that, right? They may tug at it, but it won't be dislodged, right? But the soul, yes, the soul can be invaded. Yes, you can jump in, but that's the best that can happen, right? Meaning they won't actually, in my car metaphor, jacking metaphor, they won't steal a car, right? But for a few minutes of light, they may take it for a quick joyride, but they can't take the car, right? Because the owner won't allow them to, right? Or they may struggle over the car, but they can't take the car. And that's a matter of your spiritual being. They may wonder, well, how do I keep up, or how do I maintain, or how do I get back my spiritual well-being, or my soul can't be removed, or my spirit can't be jacked. We'll deal with those things in another video, but I want to at least share with you again the concepts of spirit that works, and that essentially sometimes is convoluted in terms of the discussion that people are having, over what it is and what it isn't. And so I hope this short discussion, this short presentation, has given you something to at least chew on, something to digest. And of course, we can debate, all of the above. I want to leave you with this, because it wouldn't be right. That when we think about spirit, therefore, and the sort of the longer term spirituality, that we're referring to simply more than just immaterial beings, right? We're referring to more than just the forces and figures and entities that inhabit this world. We're referring to, so when we say spirituality, right? We're referring to not simply the practices and the acts and the rituals. We're referring to being. That is the way of existence. That's what we're referring to. So no matter where you are and what you do and where you do it and who you do it with, the being has to be the focal point, right? That is the being, right? The being has to be the focal point. And therefore, the checklist of health has to be this health of the spirit, that is the shadow, the armor, first line of defense, the health of the soul, the nuclear powerhouse, that is where the fusion reaction happens, cellular level, right? The skeletal structure, the infrastructure that is, that essentially allows for that coding, that spirit to tether to be connected to hold on to something, because it has something to hold on to, right? And of course, it also has to do with the spirit of the mind, right? What allows you to be affected, to be infected by thoughts, which is energy, by spirits, which is energy, right? That invade our minds, on a nanosecond basis, perhaps even more, but I don't know the word that's something that's smaller than a nano, second in terms of time. So whatever that, unit of time may be, all those times of being bombarded by these, images and ideas and thoughts, basically are just spirits, right? Different kinds of spirit that are affecting and invading, and it has us, off balance by, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I do this? Why did that happen? Why did this happen to me? Why am I here? Why does this happen to me? All those things, are that spirit of the mind is so unstable. And so there are ways in which you can, in fact, stable the mind. We can get to some of those kinds of therapeutic approaches in another video. But again, the point of this was to at least flesh out these essential concepts, of the spirit, of the soul, and of course, of the shadow, which again, you can find this in literature on ancient Egypt or ancient Kemet, among other places. But I think that's a great place to start. So please leave your comments and questions and experiences and thoughts below. For Baba Nyame, I've been your guide and host. Until next time, stay well.